Call the meeting to order at 7:01. We could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and good evening, and welcome to the October 23rd Committee of the Whole meeting. I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Fieser for our agenda items tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Glennon, and good evening to the Board of Education members. So we're really excited that we're able to bring some information this evening about a potential new pathway that could be offered in the Milford Public Schools. But rather than my stealing anyone's thunder, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Berg, who's going to provide a context, and then you'll also hear from Mr. Scott and some staff, I believe.
Yes, from some staff. Thank you, Dr. Fieser. Good evening, everybody. Just a quick reminder of our other pathways that the board has acted on and the district is now implementing. As you recall, 2 years ago, we implemented or we enacted our first pathway, computer science pathway. Things are going well with that. There was, again, you remember, a minor cost associated with that with some revision to a couple of our computer labs. We've changed over some courses, and eventually we're going to be going up to a capstone project. Same thing with our entrepreneurship pathway. As you recall, in last year's budget, there was some monies associated with a revision to our business labs that were more associated with the old typing labs, and we updated them to become more flexible spaces, as is more modern business spaces. And again, also with that, we were looking into a capstone project, possibly internships, and really looking to the community to help enhance those pathways. Well, we're excited this evening to bring another pathway along the same lines, but just one of the nice pieces is that as we're adding, or we're considering adding this, we can also look to a capstone piece of this because it's embedded in the project. So you can see that if we have three pathways each with their own capstone, that we can begin to see how we would work them all together into a single course, if you will, or a single project that we could possibly implement in a couple of years. We've been talking a lot about that this past summer of how do we implement the capstone piece. We have some great ideas, but they're still in draft, and we will be working with the building administration in the next couple of months to make sure that we're on path, if you will, on the right path. So I thought that was a good segue. I'm going to stop while I'm sort of ahead and turn it over to Mr. Scott.
Just going to pass these down. These are just both working documents from the committee, most of which were nice enough to join me this evening. So. You guys see that podium there, or do you want me to move?
I'm good.
Are you good, Mr. Berg?
All right, so what I'm here to talk to you tonight is about the Global Engagement Certificate and Pathway. Now, the Global Engagement Certificate comes from the State Department of Education, and it was put forward in an effort to recognize students who engage in a global or civic focus during their secondary school career. So just a couple of quick did-you-knows, and I think they're on here as well. 1 in 5 jobs in the United States is tied directly to international business. Most future business growth will be in overseas markets. And American companies lose an estimated $2 billion annually due to inadequate cross-cultural guidance for their employees in multicultural situations. So that's been part of the focus that the state had as they started thinking about trying to bring in something that would place a greater emphasis on global citizenship. So the pathway itself is a certificate that will come from the State Department of Education, but is bestowed by the Milford Public Schools. So we do have direct control over what the requirements are. We just have to fit it within the parameters set forth by the State Department of Education. The path would allow students to demonstrate their preparedness for college and career life, as well as civic life beyond secondary school. And it would validate a student's deliberate pursuit towards a global education and awareness. The Global Engagement Certificate parameters were set forward based off of two sets of national standards, one being the ACTFL national standards for world readiness, which are our foreign language national standards, and the other one being the C3 framework, or the national social studies standards. So that's where the basis for the parameter came from for the Global Engagement Certificate. The certificate does require students to meet or fulfill certain requirements. Amongst those is that they would meet a minimum of 3 credits in world language during their high school career, and then an additional 4 credits in globally themed or civic themed courses. Also that they would demonstrate preparedness for college, career, and civic life, as well as demonstrating real-world problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills. The last component of the Global Engagement Certificate is a global service learning project, which we've begun to work on. Kathy's done some work with me, and Jim was kind enough to provide us with some contact information for folks within the local community that might be able to give us some support around the Global Service Learning Project, which I'll talk a little bit more in just a moment. We do currently offer enough courses that a student could actually complete the Global Engagement Certificate right now. We do have more, of course, than 3 credits available in world language at the secondary level. And then additionally, all of these courses fall within the guidelines that the state has put forward. So we have a multitude of social studies courses that would fall into that guideline, including Model UN, Modern World History, Economics, Honors Humanities, AP Human Geography, Global Human Geography, and AP Environmental Science being a science course that also falls within the state parameters. There were also some suggested additional courses. If you take a look at this document here that's titled Civic and Global Pathway, on the back you'll see some additional courses that were recommended that we could certainly look further down the line of bringing in some additional courses. And those additional courses could be outside of the field of social studies and world language. So this could be a truly interdisciplinary pathway. The Global Service Learning Project that students would be required to do is also set forth, parameters are set forth by the State Department of Education. It does require students to select a topic that they feel very strongly about, and that topic can either be on the global stage or can be a local project that would have global implications or deal with a global problem. The projects are designed to connect the student to the community beyond their school. So that was the purpose of designing the Global Service Learning Project. As it is detailed in the paperwork you have, the Global Service Learning Project does have a 20-hour minimum requirement for students to complete the Global Service Learning Project. And the State Department of Education has offered a few suggested routes that a student might follow to complete this Global Service Learning Project, and that's the part that Kathy's been helping me out with, because we have a deep pool of local organizations and corporations that already have these types of themed projects that they're operating in, and would certainly many of them be willing to work with our students in order to help them complete this project. Now a little quote from John F. Kennedy. So that's sort of the Global Engagement Certificate in a nutshell from the state. We were very excited in both our World Language Department and our Social Studies Department when this was first made public to us. The really interesting parts for us is that this would really allow us to recognize and honor students that are already doing this type of work in our schools. So this isn't something necessarily that would be new or unique to our students. These are things our students are already doing and things that our students are already involved in. This would just give us a wonderful opportunity to really recognize the hard work and the community engagement that our students are already participating in.
Can you introduce the teachers that are here this evening?
I'm Austin Caesar. I'm the Department Chair for Social Studies at Fuller High School.
I'm
I'm Karin Almonte. I'm French teacher over at Jonathan Law and Department Chair for World Languages also.
Hi, I'm Beth Gelman. I teach at Foreign as well. I teach a couple of the courses that would be relevant here, Model United Nations and AP Human Geography.
And then Andrew Ivanko, who teaches over at Jonathan Law, was the other member of the group that had contributed to the work that we've done so far. And he teaches Model UN and a couple of the other courses on that list over at Jonathan Law. Any questions?
Are there any monetary implications to this? Doesn't
No.
look like there are.
No, there's really not. I mean, we have talked about the possibility with the capstone becoming a course that could be something, but we're not, at that point, we're really kind of talking about that right now. Additionally, this has given us cause to really start to reflect on where we are with our world language department, and as we've talked about before, trying to do some things to breathe some new life into the department and also increase our offerings both in terms of grade level and languages. We conducted a survey recently around student interest in world language. The students who did respond, the #1 language that they requested was Mandarin Chinese. We'll take a look and see how cost prohibitive that is. I don't know a lot of Mandarin Chinese teachers walking around right now, but we'll certainly take a look at that. And it also gave us some feedback as to what we can do to strengthen what we already have. So those would be the only things that would be, possible costs.
My next question was going to be, what world languages are we actually offering right now? I know French, Spanish,
In Latin.
just
Yep.
the 3.
Yep, just the 3. And right now, of course, we have it in 7th grade, 8th grade, and then at the high school level. And we're hoping to, expand that down. We have been doing some visits. We went to visit Glastonbury High School to take a look at their program, which was breathtaking. The only thing that we had to really keep in mind as we looked at their program is they have had an elementary school world language program in place for 64 years. But they have a vast array of world language offerings, and it was very exciting for our teachers who went up there to really see how they implement their program and what their standards look like. I visited a 1st grade class, and the instructor didn't speak a word of English during the entire hour-long lesson. It was amazing. I know our high school teachers and middle school teachers visit secondary school classrooms and saw equally impressive work happening there. They offer a very wide array of languages, including Mandarin Chinese, Russian, German, French, Spanish, and then
Latin, no, not.
and Latin. Yeah.
What was
So
the
obviously.
What was the second requested language? So Mandarin Chinese is
Arabic was the second most requested language. It went Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, and then there was sort of a tie for 3rd place between German, Italian, and what's the other one on there? I can't remember. Japanese, I think, scored a little lower. But German and Italian were up near the top as well.
Mrs. Federico?
Can you put the slide with the courses back up again
Yep.
for a moment?
Maybe.
Okay. So if you take AP Human Geography,
Yep.
then you wouldn't also take Global Human Geography,
No.
right? So is there anything else that overlaps there, or is it just those 2?
Amongst those courses, no. We do have an additional AP Economics offering that I didn't include on this list because it wasn't on the state list. But the
Okay.
state did say that it would be our interpretation of what courses met that requirement, so we could certainly add that. But that would be another example of 2 different levels of the same course, an
Okay.
economics course and an AP Economics course.
Okay, so throughout their high school career, they would take 4 of
Yep,
those courses,
4 of
right?
these courses and then 3 world language
And,
courses.
but the humanities is actually 2 courses, right?
It's 2 credits, but only one of those is a social studies credit, so they'd
Okay.
only get the 1 credit towards their global engagement certificate.
Oh, okay, the English
Right.
piece doesn't
Yeah.
qualify.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mrs. Brzezinski?
Thank you.
Could you tell us what some of those projects were that the state recommended?
Sure, they recommended things like working with your local Rotary Club. They recommended that many churches also have community service projects that are internationally themed or globally themed. Those were some of the key ones that they listed. They also listed things like a student creating their own project that had a global theme, or outreach to a local group within the community that has some sort of an international element to it. So anything from a student starting their own world language club within the school would qualify, all the way up to working with Rotary in their program in which they give vaccinations in Africa would count in that program.
If a student, I just know some students have gone on some kind of immersion trips during
Yep.
high school and worked in other countries on building houses or something
Yeah,
like
like
that.
Builders
That
Beyond
also-
Borders.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely, that would
Okay.
qualify as well. Any of those types of things. And then there were quite a few local organizations that had kind of similar things around either clean water or housing or medical care, and those would all be things that we could recommend to the students. The way we hope to introduce the Global Service Learning Project is sort of loose enough in its parameters that it would allow students to use their own creativity and ideas, but to have sort of a ready backup of ones in case a student's kind of struggling with what they could do.
Mr. Wiskiman?
I was just wondering if there was any minimum language competency level that the student had to reach. Because it's one thing to study a language, to be able to read it,
Yep.
but it's quite another to be able to speak it fluently enough to like travel abroad, without somebody doing interpretations.
Absolutely. No, there is not a minimum acquisition level for this particular certificate that the state offers. There are other certificates that the state has begun to offer that are more based around mastery. There's the Bilingual Certificate that the state has just recently put out a framework for that would be more based around a student mastering a second language. This one is more about that sort of global understanding of the world.
Questions here? Mr. Hagedorn?
When are you looking to implement this in?
We're hoping to include it in the program of studies for next year, so that freshmen next year would be able to enter into this if they were to choose to do so. That also gives us a few years to sort of structure what the Global Service Learning Project will finally look like.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah, so it would be, we're hoping to be able to include it in the program of studies for next year, and that would allow freshmen to start pursuing this pathway.
Perfect.
Would students that are already at one of the high schools be able to, if they're
Yeah,
freshmen or
we could
sophomores and have taken some of these classes
We
already?
could certainly look on a case-by-case basis if there was a student who really felt very strongly about this and wished to include it maybe on their college application, that would be something we could certainly take into consideration. The issue we would have right now is, of course, that we haven't finalized the structures around the Global Service Learning Project. There's also an element within this that asks the students to demonstrate their involvement in extracurricular activities, and we're waiting for a little bit of clarification as to whether that can be part of the Global Service Learning Project, or is it very specifically club-oriented, and then also whether or not courses would count as that. Many districts don't run Model UN as a course, but instead just run it as a club, and that was the example the state gave. So we're just waiting for a little bit of clarification, and we wouldn't want a junior to say they wanted to go in and then have to tell them, next year that they didn't meet some of the requirements. So,
But
certainly
possibly
we could look.
current freshmen and sophomores.
Yeah,
might
we
be
could
able to.
certainly look on a case-by-case situation for the students who were beyond freshmen next year.
Mr. Scott?
Yep.
Ms. Federico?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Do you have any sense of how many other districts are going forward with this?
Only in terms of reaching out to some of the people that I know who have similar positions to myself. I know West Hartford is looking to implement it, as well as Westport. I don't know beyond those two districts. I just happened to reach out to those two folks. I reached out to West Hartford because they had included something in their program of studies, and I thought, we could borrow some of their language as I sat down to write this, and then I reached out to Westport, which was the district I was formerly in. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wiskiman?
I was just thinking, occasionally a student will engage in a exchange, go overseas for a year and that kind of stuff. Would that be something that would play into this kind of a thing?
Yeah, that was specifically listed under their global extracurricular activities item. So that was the foreign exchange program. Also hosting a student who was involved in a foreign exchange program was also listed as the state as an example.
Dr. Fieser, you?
I just wondered, with respect to the requirement in world language for high school world languages,
Yes.
is that to be interpreted as literally you're taking the 3 years in high school?
Our recommendation as a panel is that it would be 3 high school years of world language. The state did not specify in its language that came out, but the panel, when we discussed it, we thought that it would be important to include that as being high school credits. You know, it's something that we hope will help encourage some students to stick with world language, maybe junior and maybe even possibly through their senior year.
Well, it also certainly would bring students closer to being more fluent.
Absolutely.
In the language, if they have 4 years of it.
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. ACES has a arrangement for exchange students with China.
Mm-hmm.
And while the U.S. State Department turned down their latest application for whatever reasons,
Yep.
that's still something they're pursuing, and you might want to check any contacts you have with their pursuit, because they were talking about hosting students here, also about sending students to China.
Yep.
And they have some very interesting programs along those lines, and some of the things they're trying to do. So
Yeah,
there may be some opportunities for picking up on what they're doing, not necessarily working directly, but you know, you can just kind of see what kind of things they're up to.
Never hurts to be able to piggyback off of someone else's
Absolutely.
existing plan. But yeah, and you know, in districts I've worked in previously, students have really benefited from those programs where they've been able to go over and travel to China and experience that culture and experience
Spend a
interacting
year
with those
abroad if
students.
you're really seriously interested in that culture, that language.
Yeah.
Nothing, you know, like an immersion for a full year at a high school overseas.
Absolutely.
You know, put you to the test.
So then in terms of the foreign language is something that I've heard parents ask for, you know, expansion of the program, you know, younger grades,
Yep.
more subjects, more languages for a long, long, long time. So at what point do you think you'll be prepared to make some recommendations as to what you might like to see? You know.
We're hoping, and we've been, and Mr. Burt and Dr. Fieser and I have been talking about possibly being able to revive the 6th grade program for world language. You know, I know there was an existing 6th grade program, and it unfortunately went away. So we're hoping we can revive that in the very near term. We've laid out a plan in which we could actually bring 6th grade back into bring world language back into 6th grade as soon as next year.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something we would really look to be able to do. Additionally, under that same structure that we had discussed, we would also be able to expand French from rather being just at West Shore Middle School to also existing at East Shore Middle School and Harborside Middle School. And after that, we would really like to look at, you know, trying to not necessarily recreate what we've seen in some of these other districts, but maybe bring in elementary school, an elementary school program in the very near future after that.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a planned visit to the Madison Public Schools coming up. They recently began their elementary school program just 2 years ago. This might give us a little bit more of a realistic picture of what it would look like here rather than the 64-year-old program up in Glastonbury, but they restructured their entire secondary school world language program and then brought in an elementary school program just a few years back. So we're looking forward to visiting with them, and then we had said we would select one more district with an elementary school program to visit, and then bring together the world language folks that are interested in participating and writing that program and trying to put something together based off of what we've seen.
And how about some additional offerings at the high school beyond the 3?
Yeah, the survey was the very first
Yep,
step, just
okay.
to get a feeling of what the students were interested in. From that, I have reached out. The State Department of Education does have a connection with a sister province in China, so we've sent out an email contact to them to see what their program kind of looks like. I also contacted Yale. Yale has a Chinese studies program as well. They haven't gotten back to me yet, but hopefully they'll get back to me with what they might be able to help us support. You know, there's no financial support there, but certainly
Right,
help in terms of recruitment of a trained professional and also structuring the curriculum. We've also reached out to the districts that offer a variety of different languages.
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing we're kind of wrestling with right now is making sure that whatever we bring forward is something that really does have student and community interest behind it and support behind it. We don't want to try to bring in something that's going to falter or flounder when we bring it in. So we want to make sure that we're very conscientious as we move forward, whether it's Chinese or Arabic or Italian or German or Russian. You know, we want to make sure that we bring in something that's going to not only survive but really flourish at the high school level.
Yeah, I would think that, you know, if we're looking at a program that will have some global and international implications, then having a language that's beyond the French and Spanish would be very beneficial to that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And really, you know, be beneficial to the students too, having it be on their transcript.
Yeah, and what we saw in Glastonbury, and you know, we'll see what we see in Madison, their structure was that Spanish was their language for their elementary school program. When the students reached 6th grade, they had to make a 3-year commitment to one language. They had to pick between Spanish and French. And then in 7th grade, the students were allowed to then select to take an additional language on top of their Spanish or French selection. So at that point,
Wow.
students could start to choose between taking an additional course in Russian or Mandarin Chinese. And then at the high school level, they had all of the course offerings that we previously mentioned. And perhaps most impressive when we were there was the incredible retention that the program has. At the senior level, I believe it was 50% of their students still take multiple languages, and within that 50%, 30% take 2 world languages, and 24% take 3 world languages, which was, you know, a really impressive structure.
Sure.
But we'll have to see, you know, something a little bit closer down the road than 60 years to see
Yeah.
what we can do in the short term.
I'd be interested to know, maybe in the future, if there's a correlation between foreign language, taking foreign language, more foreign language, and student achievement.
Yep.
You know, there's always that concern that you know, adding additional options to the school day takes away from something else potentially. And but I would be interested to know if there is that correlation that.
We actually put together a fairly large amount of research that deals with that very topic, and I'd be happy to
That'd be
share that
great.
with you.
Thank you.
I had shared it a little bit earlier with Dr. Fieser and Mr. Bird, and there is a very strong correlation between younger world language offering and actually higher standardized test scores rather than lower standardized test scores. Language acquisition, second language acquisition actually strengthens student skills around literacy.
Interesting. Mrs. Krasinski?
I was just wondering what's, how many students are in the high school in that
At
district?
Glastonbury, do you remember? It was a big
1100.
school.
I was gonna say 1,000, yeah,
Yeah.
1,100, right? Big.
No, excuse me, just under 2,000.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was
okay.
under 2,000, because in my mind I thought, it's foreign and law combined.
Yeah,
only have one
it was a
space.
a fairly
Yes, one
large
So
school.
it's a little more than twice the size of
Yeah.
Milford.
But there's also a program, so for example, they have an aquaculture school within their school, which I'd imagine some of the students that
Yep.
are in that program. So it may not be purely 2,000 students, just Glastonbury folks.
It's
I
twice
know
the
from
size
back
of
Just
when I
one.
curious,
coached it, it's
just
big high
because
school.
it's to have that many offerings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
we
was
need
just
a lot
wondering
of-
Oh, yeah.
how
you know.
large of a student body they had.
It's twice the size of one of our schools, but it's similar to our high school. It's 2,000 in one school. We have
Oh,
almost,
okay, yeah,
you know,
we have 1,800.
1,800 in two.
Okay,
in two
yeah.
schools, so.
Yeah. But it
But the two
certainly,
schools is an issue.
it's certainly something that, you know, like I said, it was our first visit, and we picked sort of the creme de la creme for our first
Why not?
visit to see what it can look like future down the road in Utopia. And then we'll pick a couple of places that are a little bit closer down the road in terms of time with this kind of a program. Madison does run Mandarin Chinese as one of their additional world languages at the high school. And then, you know, as I said, we'll take a look around for a third visitation a little bit later in the year.
Any other questions or comments? we feel this is a beneficial step to take? Just a general consensus from the board. Does anybody have any major objections to them moving forward with this plan?
It's a great program.
That's great.
All the more if we can offer additional pathways, that certainly, we always have to be concerned about the sustainability of how many different options there are, but this certainly looks like one that's going to be highly beneficial if we can put it in place.
Well, I think what I've really liked about our pathways is that the courses, we already have all the courses that are in place. So it's really just a matter of connecting all the dots so that the students are taking the right sequence of things. But it's not like we're really diverting anything because they would already be doing it. And I think it makes sense to pursue this because it's something that will look really nice on a student's transcript.
I think also too, just to refresh the board's memory, when we had the community conversation it was a year ago, 2 years? Around a second pathway. One of the things that emerged through that was something that had to do with civic responsibility, civic leadership. There was some mention of global, but I do remember the civic piece was very strong that emerged. So the fact that the state has come forward with this pathway, which we had no idea that they were even planning this, we think is really exciting, and it, I think, delivers a really strong message as to, what's important with respect to kids learning, just beyond their school and their school community to the local, but that the local can be actually connected globally in an important way.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you very much. It's very interesting. So you'll send us that additional...
Yeah, I'll send you the additional research around world language and how it impacts standardized testing scores and student outcomes.
Thanks, folks, for coming out.
Thank you.
To the second item on the agenda are the third revision, actually, to the targets. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Burt so that he can address the changes that were made.
Okay, thank you very much. So for the most part, again, these were formatting changes as recommended by the board. I can essentially take you, if you turn to page 9 in the packet or page 6 in the targets, I'll just go through some of the changes. As you can see at the top, if you look at the dates, the years, 2015, 16, 17, etc., you notice, as we said last time, we had benchmark or BNCH only under one column. They are now in the 2018 and 2019 column. In addition, there is a definition down at the bottom that gives you an understanding of what that benchmark is. It's not an annual target, but it is give you basically essentially gives you some guidance to the ultimate target in 2020. And then some other minor formatting to the actual numbers themselves. The benchmark numbers are in the darker font and they're italicized, and the actual numbers are in the white font and bold. And we added a little lighter shade for the years we haven't met yet. So that's pretty much it. We did add, I believe, there was a request to have the scale scores. If you turn to page 10, the last page of the packet, we added the scale scores for the ERW or the ELA, as we're saying in the packet, and the math scores to reach benchmark on the SAT. I think there was one other minor change. If you turn to the cohort page, which is the previous page, we just tried to make it clear that this was following a single grade from grade 3 in 2016 up to grade 7 in 2020. So it's a rough cohort of the same students through those years. And if you have any questions,
We've spent a lot of time going over the math, slicing and dicing the numbers, talking about the mathematical way that the targets were arrived at. But I just wanted to take a step back and ask, do you do you believe these targets are achievable? I mean, and first I'm talking about the 2020 3-year targets.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. And the benchmarks are also achievable, or they're just more of a guide?
If I would say they were achievable, then we would say those are targets for individual years, which I'm not saying.
Okay. No, that was the clarification I was looking for.
That was a tap dance there.
Okay. And I appreciate the formatting. I think it's clear. Thank you.
So in all seriousness, I'm sorry. That's why in my original version, in the original version we produced, we didn't have those yearly benchmarks, if you were, because it really is about reaching that that final target in 2020. Because, as I said in our original workshop, when you start looking at these as annual targets and you don't reach that target on each year, then it becomes very high stakes for everyone involved. So you could have a down year or an up year. This year we had more of a flat year for our ELA scores. We are hopeful that the systems and the attention that we're paying attention to the reading scores throughout the district will see a rise in next year's scores, similar to the rise we saw in math, but next year math could be slightly down. The overall idea, one of the things that we're going to produce in our next data presentation next fall will be that trend line. Remember we talked about that, producing graphs that say, here's a starting point in 2016, here's the end point in 2020, how are we doing on an annual basis? In general, where we want to see that upward trend.
Because if I look over them, just looking over them quickly, we're looking for, 7 to 11 or 12 point increases between now and 2020, right? That's where.
Correct.
That's where we want to be, and that's what we are saying now is achievable.
Well, and again, we've provided you with 2 different measurements. The one is the growth measurement that we mirror with the state that really is talking about growing all students, which we think is important. We also provided you with the achievement scores, essentially the cut scores, to say that we're accountable for that. It's also part of our accountability report for the state. So we wanted to provide you with both those things, as well as measuring progress for a certain group of students through the cohort model, to say, are we moving kids appropriately as they move up through the grades? Are we addressing the needs of that particular group to make sure that if there's certain students that are above grade level, that we're really paying attention to the students that are not above grade level? That as we've talked about numerous times over the past few years, we want to make sure that we're growing all students and not just paying attention to those students that are just below the target level. It's real easy, and I've been in a district where you pay attention to that 10% of kids that is just below the goal level. And that's dangerous, because then you don't pay attention to your high achieving students, and you're not paying attention to your lowest achieving students. And you want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of all of those students. So we feel that we've provided a window, if you will, with some measurable targets, in addition to the annual data report that we give you on our overall achievement for all the state standardized tests.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Whiskeyman?
I'm looking at the last page, SATs. All of our students take the SAT at this time, if I recall correctly?
That is the new state assessment for 11th grade.
Okay.
For math, and it's called ERW on this SAT and ELA.
So, looking at the targets for the high need students in grade 11 math, I mean, that's like a triple growth from the 17 of 2016 to the 44 of 2020, which certainly would be a challenging thing to accomplish, to triple the achievement. So I'm just curious as to what kind of strategies have you put into place to try to accomplish that kind of growth in that period of time? Because I just see that as a tremendously challenging thing to accomplish.
I think I agree with you. It is a momentous challenge for us, but one of the most important things, as you know, about Connecticut as a whole, that the achievement gap between these groups is something that's been cited as the worst in the United States. We have the
I
biggest
don't
achievement gap,
dispute
so,
that,
yeah,
but
so-
what I'm curious is,
Right.
how do we actually intend to accomplish those kind of levels of improvement, given the challenges and the long-standing gap that has been there, which seems to me that we haven't been successful in the past in breaking through that. So what are we doing differently now that we hope to help us get that achievement really moving forward?
From my perspective, it's really using student level data for teachers to make sure they're addressing needs in the classroom. We have to use those core area strategies for each and every one of our students in the classroom. A lot of times you hear about interventions that take place, but if we're looking at overall 36% of our students at the math benchmark, that's for all students back in 2016, a good improvement in 2017, but you cannot intervene. Let's take 200 kids. You cannot intervene, with 120 kids. You cannot pull students out and have a math interventionist work with us. That means we have to look at our core area instruction, which is what we've been doing. We've been taking a hard look at how is it that our classrooms are running, how is it that our instruction is aligned to the curriculum, is our curriculum aligned to the standards adequately, are we making sure that the demands of the assessment are meeting those standards that we've placed into our curriculum. So we're making sure that all those pieces align. And again, the most important thing is, do you know your kids in front of you, and are you individualizing instruction as best as possible within your classroom? So we have more data points now. As I said, last spring we introduced the PSAT 8-9 to our 9th grade students. So that's another piece of information for our 10th grade teachers now. But all 9th grade teachers, we should be looking at how did they come out of 8th grade with both our NWA scores and our SBA scores. And that's 2 data points before students even walk in the door, that you have an understanding of, okay, here's where your students sit on these particular assessments, and then start working on how do we individually, address their needs. Obviously, if their students are significantly behind, sometimes that core area instruction in the classroom is going to address that. That's where we start looking at the interventions. That's where you have the academic centers, which the board has supported for the past few years, that help with that next level, or the next tier, if you will, of interventions, which is true at all the levels. That is something, it's not just on the SAT. We do have a gap at all levels, and it really is about paying attention to all your students, getting to know all of your students, and then being able to customize your instruction for them.
Well, I'm encouraged because we've nudged it forward here the first year, so certainly look forward to making it take off.
I think for me going forward, one of the things that stuck with me from having Ajit from the State Department visit with us was, that it's not always a straight line projection from point A to point B, and you have to be willing to acknowledge and accept that. When you have your target is here, you might be able to take a wavy line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The board should also know that, Mr. Bird has shared this more than once with the building principals, and they're very excited about this because it's so clear, and that there are 4-year targets. So even in meetings with principals around their goals, they have talked about their own data, but also seeing what's reasonable with respect to where to be, for example, where the district wants to be in 2020, and then the implications of that for their own performance, their own students' performance. So already, people are really seeing the merit of it.
Great. Any other comments or questions? We will formally adopt this evening if the board is ready to do so. Okay, seeing none, there's a motion, Ms. Tobias.
Yes, I have a motion that the Milford Board of Education approves the district academic targets as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, and that was it for the agenda items, correct? All right, so we'll move on to public comment. Speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about the Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with Milford Public School System. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted, consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. Discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Please note, public comment tonight is limited to agenda items only, and because it's a committee of the whole meeting, and we are being televised live. So is there anybody who would like to address the board this evening for a public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Probably the earliest meeting.
Come here and when they ask for speakers, I'll stand up and speak.
Record.
I might do that, just a thought.